Welcome to the Walks of Life podcast. I'm Russell Smith. Today's guest is Bryan McGrath, a longtime friend who writes the conservative Wahoo blog on Substack. Bryan recently retired after a career as an officer in the United States Navy and then as a naval strategist, consultant, and advocate. In the Navy, he served as a surface warfare officer, winning the prestigious Admiral Elmo Zumwalt Award for inspirational leadership. And then the ship he commanded, the USS Bulkley, won the USS Arizona Memorial Trophy as the most combat-ready ship in the Navy. He retired with the rank of commander and then turned his energies to consulting on naval matters, tirelessly advocating for modern, mighty, and ever-ready U.S. naval. He lives on the eastern shore of Maryland. In his writings and in his conversation, I always find Bryan a wellspring of clarity and wisdom. I've been eager to interview Bryan for a long time, and I know you'll enjoy this conversation as much as I will. With that, Bryan, welcome.
Thank you, Russell. It's good to be with you, and you look great.
Thank you, Bryan. You look great too. Let's begin. You and I have talked about this a bit in the past, but I know just the barest sketch of this, really, what I just outlined for folks, but give us a sketch of your career.
Oh, I graduated from the University of Virginia on a Sunday. I played golf with my friends on Monday. I drove to Norfolk on Tuesday. I reported to my ship on Wednesday. I was 21 years old. I still hadn't turned 22. I was going to go in the Navy for not one day longer than my 4-year commitment. And then I got into it. I was on a frigate for 2 years, and that frigate was going to go into the reserve force, which was something in the late Reagan administration that we don't really have anymore. And I was captain and said, listen, sir, if 4 years of this ship is all I see, then I'm not going to stay in. And he says, what do you want? And I pointed through his porthole, or I pointed over towards the cruisers, the new Aegis cruisers that were across the pier. And I said, I'd like to go over there. And he made some phone calls and he made some things and he got me transferred over to the pretty brand new Aegis cruiser. I went there. I wrote an article once for Naval History, Naval Institute Proceedings, where I referred to the men I served with there as the greatest group of men since the Second Continental Congress. And I stick with that. And that group of men and the pace of that ship, its operations, the first Gulf War, made me realize that I loved being a naval officer. I loved going to sea. And so I decided to stay in. I decided to do what I could. I had tours on several more cruisers. I commanded a destroyer. I wrote some strategy for the Navy. I got to a point in life where I was single. I didn't have any money to speak of. I like to say that I had spent my 80% of my money on alcohol, cars, and women. I had wasted the rest. But I really was not in a great spot. And I thought to myself, I need to go see if I can do something else. And I decided to retire from the Navy, and I became this little cottage industry of consulting and advocacy, and started doing that, I think, in around 2008. And I retired from that 3 months ago. And here I am talking to Russell Smith.
And here you are. When you retire and you go out to pasture, you get to talk to me. Like, what a send off.
This is the best. This is the best. This is the icing on the cake.
So let me ask, why'd you choose the Navy and not another branch? Was that just ROTC at UVA, or was there more behind it?
My father was an enlisted man in the Navy from 1950 to 53. And to listen to him, probably the most influential man in my life, to listen to him as a kid, there was never a bad day. There was never a bad day in the Navy. And so all I ever heard were the great stories. And so when I came time for me, high school with double-digit inflation in the late 70s and early 80s, double-digit unemployment, double-digit interest rates, and my father running a business And me having 5 other siblings, I decided I would see if somebody else would pay for it. And University of Virginia and ROTC decided they would do that. And there was only Navy. I was not interested in any of the other services.
So if you hadn't gone to UVA, if you had gone to a school with Army ROTC or Air Force ROTC, would you have just not done ROTC and then gone into the Navy later?
I would not have gone to college in the frame of mind I was at 18 unless I was going Navy ROTC or into the Naval Academy, which ultimately turned me down. I didn't get into the Naval Academy. So I got into Duke, Virginia, and Penn State, and I had a Navy ROTC scholarship, which you get separately and before that time. And so I knew I had what I needed.
Okay. All right. So it was like ride the Navy or nothing. Nice.
Yeah. It just seemed like a reasonable thing to do.
So then on the back end, did you think about staying in the Navy for your entire career, or what was appealing about the Navy as a career? What wasn't? It sounds like your dad never had a bad day in the Navy. Now, I've had a lot of different careers, and none of them have I had no bad days. But what wasn't so appealing about it? Or did you ever think about I'm gonna stick with the Navy my entire run here?
When I was on my second ship and I went to sit down with that captain, Captain Hank Giffen, who became Vice Admiral Giffen at some point, and who is the second most influential man in my life. He said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "I'm not really sure." And he says, "What do you want to do when you grow up?" And I said, "I want to be the CNO, the Chief of Naval Operations." And I really did. I wanted to be the Chief of Naval Operations. And he said, "Okay, then we need to get you to Washington and get you an aide job." And he set that up, and I went in for an interview, and a 3-star admiral hired me, and I was on this ridiculous trajectory, and I had a really great career going. And I thought I would stay in for 40 years. I thought, I'm 60 years old right now. I thought I would still be on active duty at this point. But I got a sign, a signal. So when I made that decision to stay in, I said to myself, as an impetuous 26 or 27-year-old, I am going to stay in the Navy until I get turned down for something that I believe I should have gotten, which is promotions. It was basically when the system sends you a signal that it's time to go, you go. And that was basically what I thought. I thought that would happen at 3-star admiral level. I didn't realize it would happen as a commander. And that was, there's a board that meets. You have statutory boards, which are for promotions to commander, captain, rear admiral. And then you have administrative boards, which the services run. And there was an administrative board after my command was over, after what I thought was a ridiculously successful command, to pick people to command at the next level. It's called Major Command in the Army. I think this is the brigade level. And I didn't get picked. And I was 40. I was sitting, I didn't have a wife, I didn't have any kids. I was a free agent, and I sat there and I thought, holy moly, this signal wasn't supposed to come early. And I was really angry. I was not a happy fellow at the time. And I said, to heck with this. I'll just quit. I'll just resign. I'm gonna walk away. I had already been selected for promotion to captain. Oftentimes when that happens and you put your letter in to resign, they won't let you resign because you stole a spot from somebody in that last promotion list. And to my discredit, I did that. I put my letter in thinking maybe it wouldn't be accepted, but it got accepted. And so I resigned out of anger, pique, and ego, because I had said at 27, when the system sends you that signal, go do something else. I just didn't expect it to happen that early, but it did, and I decided I would see if I could beat something else.
Huh.
Yeah, it was a tough. It was a tough. It was a tough thing to take. I did everything I was supposed to do. The problem was, I got some feedback from the board, and the feedback I got was, you promoted early to lieutenant commander, you promoted early to commander. We figured we could get you next year, and we could take that position and give it to someone else who was on his third look.
Mm.
And I thought to myself, that sounds like I'm being penalized for being a deep promoter twice. And my ego and my fragility and my sense of self couldn't take that. So I walked.
So let's just say years on and other experiences on, how does that decision sit with you now? Is it still a source of angst, or is it something that, I don't know, how do you feel about it now?
I have My life has changed in so many incredibly positive ways. I met Catherine and was asked into her family
Mm.
18 years ago, and our two girls. I cobbled together a financially successful business that I was able to turn into an early retirement at 60, relatively early. I have an unbelievably wonderful life, but I can't honestly say that when I see dudes who I was peers with, when I see dudes who were my subordinates. One of my subordinates when I was XO of Cruiser is now the three-star, the director of operations for the Joint Staff, Vice Admiral Fred Kacher, the single most talented man I've ever seen on active duty in the United States Navy. But he worked for me, and when I see these guys, I sometimes think, I wonder. But
Mm.
there are wonders that I've had too, and I've had a pretty darn good life, and I like where I am, and so I'll stay here.
It's also interesting to me that you, at least the way you just said it, you kind of came up with this rule at age 27. The first time the
Yeah,
world says no, I will pay attention and I will do something about it. And then 13 years later, so another half of your life later,
right.
you stuck to your guns about that rule. I found that really interesting too.
I am. Some might call that a principled stance. Some might call that a stubborn stance. I am either principled or stubborn, depending on how you see that. And that was the principle. My operating principle was, when the system sends you a signal,
Yeah.
walk. And so I did.
Huh.
Yeah.
So let me go into a couple questions that really I have. I read a lot of history. I read a lot of military history, and I don't really know. Tell us about the day-to-day responsibilities of running a U.S. naval ship. What does the captain do? What are his or her primary duties? And what do you have to get?
That's a great question. The Navy and the process that creates a commanding officer at 40 or 41 years old is a really good process. By the time you get to that point, you know what you're doing. I felt I When I took over as captain of the USS Bulkley, I was more confident in my ability to do that job than I had been in any other job in the Navy that I went to. And I think that's a part of the process. It's the beauty of the process. Let's talk about the captain of the ship. The captain of the ship has ultimate accountability, authority, and responsibility. It's all married in one person. It is the best job I can imagine. It really is. It's sick how great a job it is. I had roughly 300 when the air det and the two helicopters were on board. I had a few more, roughly 300 people who were all swimming in one direction. We were all trying to create combat readiness. The product of every ship captain is combat readiness. And my job was to take the things that the Navy and the Surface Force provided me, resources, people, programs, guidance, direction, and turn that into a product. And that product was combat readiness. And who's the former football coach for Alabama, one of those titles? I don't remember his name. Do you remember his name?
Was it Nick Saban?
Saban. And I used one of Saban's leadership principles as pretty much the only one I had, which was we're going to do this over and over again until it's perfect. And then we're going to do it perfectly over and over again. And that was whether we were talking about main space fire drills for the engineering plant, engine shutdown drills, combat systems stuff, seamanship and navigation, whatever it was that the function that was under study at that time, it would be done repetition until it's perfect. And we're just going to keep doing it perfectly. Perfect practice makes perfect. Practice doesn't make perfect. Practice makes perfect. So a captain of a ship has two jobs. You have the job you do when you're ashore, when the ship is tied up to the pier, and you are interrelating with the training world, the maintenance world, the resources world, the chain of command. It's like the board of directors, right? It's the CEO dealing with the board of directors. That part of my job, I loved. I loved doing that. There's very little there's very little that you need to do to have a combat ready ship that you can't do pierside because of all the wonderful synthetic training devices that the Navy provides. And so this perfect practice, this over and over again stuff happened pierside. It was relentless. My ship's motto, or not my ship's motto, but my command philosophy was relentless excellence. We had this exercise when I was in ship captain school, and the instructor wanted us to create our command philosophies. And these command philosophies have a bumper sticker, and then you lay it out with bullets. And I turned in 2 words. I turned in relentless excellence. And he was nonplussed, and he said, "You need to develop this." And I was like, "No, I don't. What more do I need? This is perfect. This is relentless. It never stops, and it never accepts mediocrity. That's it. That's all." I was in a chain of command, and he outranked me, so I went and turned it into something else. But then there's the at sea part of the job. The at sea part of the job, basically, in my view, is to be in the right place at the right time 10 seconds before the disaster happens, and to keep that disaster from happening. Because if the fundamental operations of that ship are in any way dependent on the presence of or the impact of the commanding officer, then he or she has failed. That ship runs because the operations officer, the combat systems officer, the supply officer, the weapons officer, the chief petty officer's mess, because they've all been synchronized, they've all got a plan, they all know what their places are, they all know how to execute. And the captain just walks around and pats people on the back and smiles and smiles and exhorts people, gets on the 1MC and says, "Good morning, Wolf Pack. We got a great day ahead of us today. Your job is theater, it's positivism. It's very different at sea." I said to my XO, "No meetings after dinner. Do not come and bother me after 9 o'clock at night. unless the ship is burning, sinking, or under attack. This place knows how to operate without me, without you. Let them do it. So that's my sense of what a captain does and how it's supposed to go.
So I want to ask a related question, which is what does a ship's captain owe the sailors, owe the ship? And maybe you were in the consulting world, contracting, consulting, and so saw into the private sector as well. How might that differ from what a private sector leader owes subordinates
Well,
outside the military, outside the government?
that's a great question. There, I'll start by saying military service is different because everybody on that ship, because they raised their hand and took an oath, has vowed that they will give their life for their country. That 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 is different. That's different than going to work at the glass factory or whatever it is you're doing. I want listeners to be aware of the fact that I used the language of business when I talked about what a captain's product is, practice combat readiness. And I believe the civilian world has an incredible amount to teach the military about consistent product production, consistency, eliminating variation, right? One of the problems in the surface for many years, is slowly being stamped out, is there was this sense that it's your ship, captain. You make a decision, and I'll never forget. We were getting ready to deploy, and the Second Fleet, the 3-star, his staff came down and did a force protection exercise on my ship. And we were in the debrief, and there was this wonderful senior chief, really smart guy, representing the 3-star. He was debriefing us, and at one point he said, "Captain, we don't want to tell you how to run your ship." And I said, "Wait a second, stop. Tell me how I'm going to run my ship. Because if you have something to offer, I want to hear it." If the 3-star admiral who sees all of these things on all of these ships and all of this variation that's to inefficiency and a lack of performance, if he has something to offer, tell me what it is. So the things that are like the civilian world greatly outweigh the things that are unlike the civilian world. But when you ask me what I owed those sailors, I owed them 51% of my life. A captain has to have a personal life. A captain has to have a family life. A captain has kids. They have all those things. But I think at the end of the day, you get this ship for 2 years. The American people are trusting you with it. They get 100% of that 51%. That's what the crew gets. And I don't think that's the same in the civilian world.
Let me ask the other side of this coin, which is what does, in your case, a naval commander captaining a ship, what does that person owe his superior officers, the people above him, the people he's reporting to? And also, how might that differ from circumstances and leadership outside the military?
Less than you might think. Subordinates, whether they're in the private sector or in the military sector, owe their boss the truth. Bad news doesn't get any better with time. You never have to remember. If you tell the truth, you never have to remember what you said, ever. And I think telling the truth, I think, again, in the military, I owed my boss what I owed my crew, which was 100% of that 51%, 100% of that greater than majority of my, I used to call it give a damn, 100% of that 50% of my give a damn, 51%. But I think that the things that someone in a position of responsibility owes to the person that is responsible over them, it's tell the truth. And I think That's probably, and if the truth is, I'm not up to this job, then you have to tell that truth too. I frankly I was shocked when I was in command, when I would talk to my peers, when I talk about how many guys were just getting through the day. They were just doing what they needed to do to get to the next day. And after two times 365s of those, they could say, I commanded a ship and walk away. It killed me that people trusted with that ship and with those people who weren't having the time of their lives, who didn't understand how important your job is. My father, who like we were talking about earlier, did 3 years in the Navy. One of his most prized possessions was a letter his captain wrote to his parents, like a year after he got to the ship. I never forgot that. I still have, I made my XOs and my ship's offices give me copies of every letter I wrote. I have every letter I ever wrote to any parent of any sailor. Those little things make a difference. And communicating the truth to your boss in the Navy, in the civilian world, it makes no difference. But that 100% of 51% is different. You're a line manager at Arby's. You owe your boss 100% of what you got there at the job, but it's only 50%. It's not 51. I had to give of my personal life to my boss and to my crew to make it work.
So why, in your view, did people muddle through in pretty darn senior ranks with pretty darn important responsibilities, potentially life and death responsibilities, if the world changed, maybe in a slight way here and there? I'm surprised to hear that. And maybe it's the gloss I have on the military and military leaders for being selfless and some of those things. Maybe it's a golden halo, but I'm surprised to hear you say that. Why pretty
Because the
senior
bell
command?
because the bell curve, because Gaussian distribution works everywhere. You have on the left side of that curve, you have really bad captains who are failing. In the middle, big fat middle, you have the ones that are just struggling to get by and do an average performance. And on the right, you have ones that are just killing it. That curve applies everywhere in life, even on ships. If you look at just the star admirals in the Navy, my guess is you could apply those 10 guys. There's a Gaussian distribution of them. Now, it's really skewed way over to the right because they're high performers, but some of them aren't performing as well as others. That's just the way it is.
Yeah, the Peter principle.
It's not even the Peter. It's a hard job. It's a really hard job. Some of these ships are old. Some of these ships, the big Navy didn't do any favors by cutting the spare parts budget, by cutting the number of people you had, by cutting your travel budget to send people to schools. There's all kinds of things. We try to make ourselves effective by becoming efficient. That's a loser. That is a loser. You make yourself effective by funding operations to the level that are required to be efficient. Those lessons are being learned, and as we stare down the barrel of what's going on in the world right now, and the sense that we are somehow a little behind where we ought to be, and I think people are rightly thinking that, the resources are flowing, I think, more effectively to the forces, and that's what we need. You can't spend your way to readiness, but you sure as hell can spend your way to being a better Navy. You have to have good people. You have to have the right parts. You have to have the right supply chain, all those other things. Yeah. We're slowly getting there, I think.
I want to ask you a question about something you've written about in the past in your newsletter. To me, it's a fascinating and an inflexible Navy rule. If you're a captain on a ship and that ship runs aground or it collides with something, you are done being in charge of a ship. Tell me more about that and just talk through that a little bit more. I'm just fascinated in the inflexibility there.
Look around you. Look around the world. Find places where people are held accountable. They're rare. They're very rare. Our body politic cries out for people to be held accountable for decisions they make or policies they implement. The lack of accountability, people outrunning accountability, people not taking responsibility, people not exercising authority. Our society, I believe, is diminished because of these deficits. There is one place that I am really aware of where every day when you go to work, you know that even if almost every time there's a collision, there's a grounding. Last year's college graduate is up on the bridge running the show, and they forget to tell, or they don't tell the captain's sleeping. The captain is doing an inspection in the engineering plant. The question is, that captain create in the minds of his watchstanders the philosophy that they needed to call him? Or are they afraid of him? Do they not want to wake him up? Was he a bad wake up? Was he just a snarly, gnarly old man or whatever? So this concept that doesn't matter if it was your fault because it was your fault. That concept always appealed to me. I always knew that any day we wear a little pin, we wear a little command at sea pin over our surface warfare pin. Any day that pin could be taken from me because commanding that ship wasn't a birthright. It reflected my career to that point, but that concept of commanding officers exercising authority, being held accountable, and being responsible, those indivisible virtues underpin a system where what's the expression that Jefferson used? The tree of liberty is watered with the blood of patriots. The tree of command is nourished by the blood of sometimes relatively innocent captains. And it makes everybody in the job that much sharper. That's why I support it. That's why I support it. And I've had friends who had just terrible, unfortunate things happen, who I would look and I'd say, okay, you got to go. Next guy up. It's tough. It's tough. But the single sanction, I like it. I like it. I think it's good. It's good for the Navy. It's really good for the Navy.
It certainly seems like you would keep captains very focused.
What else you got to do? You're the captain of a ship, right? This is a special trust and responsibility. I love my friends in their other services. I love all of the services equally. The bottom line is commanding a ship or a submarine at sea is just different. It's just different. I'll tell you a story. When I was in command, a friend of mine was in command of a Patriot battery. This guy went on to be a 3-star general, General Dan Carbler, one of the great Americans. He was a lieutenant colonel. He was in charge of a Patriot battery. And I went down to visit him, and he asked me to come down in my uniform, and we did a command presentation to me, and we went out and visited the battery. We did all these things. And the questions I asked the maintenance guys, the operations guys, the intelligence guys, the questions I asked were the questions that the system I grew up in demanded of me. So that by the time I was in command of my ship, I was not the smartest person on the combat system. I was not the smartest person on the supply system. the engineering plant, the auxiliary systems. But there weren't more than two or three others in each of those places that were smarter than I was. So I could go and sit to this, and I'd go and sit to talk with this Patriot battery, and I'd say to the warrant officer in charge of maintenance, I said, he was talking about this is the cooling system, and I said, what do you use? Is it ethylene glycol? And he looks at me like I had 20 heads. Like, how'd you know that? Because that's what we use. And I think in his mind, he's, how do you know that? And my thing is, because I'm supposed to know that. Because the system that put me in command of this ship demanded that level of knowledge of me. And it's, again, something I love about command at sea.
So here's a question for you. If you could have served under an officer, one U.S. naval leader, past or present, who would it have been?
Spruance. Admiral Raymond Spruance. World War II hero. Spruance.
Okay, so that gets me to another question I wanted to ask, which is this. My sense is, and maybe tell me if I'm wrong about this, but my sense is Spruance is underrated as even by naval experts and historians. I mean, the key biography of him is called The Quiet Warrior, which is almost an oxymoron today. Am I right in that evaluation of Spruance? And if so, why is Spruance underappreciated? And why would, of all naval officers, present and past, you picked him to serve under?
The reason he's underrated is because under Nimitz out in the Pacific, there were two guys. There was Halsey and there was Spruance. Those were the two big dogs. Halsey was flashy. Halsey was quotable. Halsey was bold. Halsey was a personality. He was a big personality. Spruance was a methodical, prepared, well-read, well-studied, intellectual leader. And because I'm an emotional leader, and because I'm a little bit more like Halsey, and I don't mean that in any way except personality-wise, I generally tend not to like people like me that much. I like being led by and directed by quiet, steady, confident, mature men and women. And I think that's what Spruance was.
Let me keep going down this path just for a couple more questions. I'm just, again, talking about World War II. To me, it seems that history today gives kind of short shrift to the U.S. naval leaders of the Second World War. Army leaders like Patton and Dwight Eisenhower and George Marshall, they are, or at least for a long time after the war, they were household names. And it seems to me that far fewer people appreciate the roles played by the top U.S. naval commanders, like you mentioned, Nimitz and Halsey and Spruance and William Leahy and Ernest King. Why is that? And what would you want to tell listeners about the role of the U.S. naval leaders and just the U.S. Navy, period, in winning that two-front war?
Let's see. Number one, armies are important. Armies are critical to winning wars. Armies take something from the other side that the other side values, and that is territory. Navies don't take territory. Armies, ground forces take territory. Ground forces, therefore, have a much more tangible link with the settlement of conflict. They are able to, it's easier to discern that connection with war termination. When you look at a land army destroying another land force, a white flag goes up, game over. Navies, I think, are less tangibly connected to the settling of the issue, but they are far more involved in losing wars. Your Navy can lose your war for you in a day. This is what was said about the British at, I can't remember the name of the World War One naval battle.
At
I'll
Jutland?
remember. Who? Jutland. Jutland. That's the one. And whether it was Jutland or battles against Napoleon, the bottom line is navies are strategically critical. And the Navy in World War II fought a very strategic war. The Army and the Marine Corps fought very important, critical operational portions of that strategy. The Navy provided them with the mobility. The Navy got them where they needed. The Navy provided air power. The Navy did all sorts of important things to enable the Army and the Marine Corps to hold things the other side valued at risk that the Navy couldn't. That's why Nimitz, Halsey, Spruance, McCain, that bunch get what I think what you referred, I think was short shrift, while MacArthur and the whole
Yeah.
army guy, that, but and Eisenhower and Patton and all. It's easy for us as spectators to tie the victory to the army, to the land force. Doesn't mean the Navy's not important. And I never got all that worried about it.
What are the great lessons of naval history? Strategy, tactics, geopolitical, leadership, whatever you want to comment on.
The number one lesson of naval history is you must maintain your Navy in a state of readiness, even when it looks like there's no reason to have a Navy maintained in a state of readiness, because you cannot conjure a Navy quickly. That is lesson number one. Armies, now let's face it, in modern armies, obviously are more technologically dependent than in the old days. But bottom line is you can raise an army quicker than you can a navy. This is incidentally why our framers put in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution that the Congress is responsible for raising armies and providing for a navy. I think that's less important today, that distinction, because armies can go to pot pretty quickly today too. But the lesson is you must maintain your naval power even when it looks like you're not going to need it, because you someday will need it. And if it's not there, you're done. I think everything else flows from there, that no matter how, especially for an island nation like we are, your Army and your Marine Corps are no good unless they can get to the fight. The only way you get to the fight is by sea. That's how you get mass. That's how you get mass. The 18th Airborne, the 82nd Airborne, those are great units. It's a great division. It's a great brigade. Bottom line, though, is when our army goes to war, it goes in ships. It goes with lots of equipment and lots of airlift. I think that's probably the best lesson, the one from which all of the others flows, is you got to keep it. If you are a maritime nation, you don't get to take a break. You don't get to take a breath. You don't get to say, no, we don't need this. We took a break after the fall of the wall, and we still haven't recovered from it. We cannot build a Navy fast as we want because there's not the industrial base to do. There are not the workers to do. That was a short-sighted That was a short-sighted set of policies by administrations of both parties.
How do you define a hero, and who are your heroes? And they can be Navy, they can be in life. And then why are they your heroes?
I think heroes are people who, when circumstances are at their most dire, rise to the occasion. I live with a woman who is my hero, Catherine. Catherine's son was killed in the World Trade Center in 2001, and left her with a 2-year-old and a 4-month-old. I have seen a video of her at a memorial service for her less than a week dead husband, comforting everyone else there with her words.
Hmm.
And her fortitude and her determination to go on in the face of that tragedy. They were a great love story. To say that two people were soulmates understates that relationship from all I can discern on this side of it. But when moral courage and fortitude and grace and presence were most required, she stood up. She stood tall. She's a hero. She's very much a hero. I saw George W. Bush. I saw a lot of that from him. I believe that we saw him grow in office. We saw him, when the chips were down, lead this country in a
Hmm.
ethical, moral, and consistent way. So I think that's, when I look at heroes, I look at people who are able to act way beyond the average person's capability, not when things are good, not when things are okay, but when things are at their worst. That's
Hmm.
And I have never ever faced that kind of adversity. I wonder sometimes how I would respond. I don't know. Nobody knows. Nobody knows. You can pretend and you can hope and you can project, but nobody knows. Nobody knows how they're going to react when there's a school shooter.
Hmm.
Nobody knows. But the people who, when that moment rise, in that moment when the chips are most down, that's what I consider a hero.
Hmm. I want to continue going down these questions around history for just a couple more.
Yeah, yeah.
So tell us your thoughts on how history will view the following people or institutions. And let me start with Ulysses Grant.
History will treat Ulysses S. Grant very well, both as a military leader and as a president. Most Americans don't know that the civil rights movement was born in his administration. There were some scandals driven by, I think, family members, primarily more than anybody else, that beset him. But he was a man of great moral courage. The great story, the Battle of Shiloh, the first day, Sherman and Grant get their butts kicked. And the line that I've read is, as Sherman says to Grant the next day, "Grant, we've had the devil's own day." And Grant said, "Yep, tomorrow we lick them." And I just love that. I
I
love
love
that.
that story. I
It's
love
one of
that
the
story.
best. It's one of the best. Tomorrow we lick them. if there's something I can have on my tombstone, that's what, because it's all right. Tomorrow we look up. We had a setback today. We're going to go do it. And I love that. Ulysses S. Grant, very positively viewed by history.
Next one, the British Empire.
Although it is fashionable in some circles to hold the British Empire up for scorn, I think the British Empire ultimately was a great force for for spreading the benefits and virtues of Western civilization, which I believe are virtuous and beneficial. And I think the British Empire stands as a very important rock on which that civilization has been positioned.
How about the US dropping the atomic bombs on Japan?
Necessary, but evil. The technology was known. People knew this could happen. There would have been nuclear weapons had there not been a Manhattan Project. It could have been Germany that built them, or Great Britain, or Russia, all of whom had active programs. So the building of the bomb and then the wielding of the bomb, I have never seen any strategist or any military planner who talked about an invasion of the Japanese home island, who talked about it in ways that did not lead to the death of scores of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of American lives. So necessary.
I think a lot about Harry Truman there. On his desk, he said, the buck stops here. And while it was controversial and remains, and probably should remain controversial, I think he was okay bearing that responsibility and that accountability for making that decision. He knew it was his,
Yeah.
and he stuck with his guns.
The thing that I love is that he didn't even know about it as vice president. He didn't even know the project was happening. I love that. I love that. And I also love exactly what you love, that he stood up and said, this is my decision and this is what we're going to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Tell me your thoughts on how history will view Elmo Zumwalt.
Elmo Zumwalt was Elmo Zumwalt was the chief of naval operations in the 1970s, who helped. The 70s were a very tough time on the Navy. There were race riots on some ships. The draft was, I think the draft went away either during his time as CNO or just after. Zumwalt was an innovator. Elmo Zumwalt was a man who understood what was required to bring the Navy into the 21st century. And I think the Navy will treat Elmo Zumwalt very positively, and should treat him positively.
Let's talk about Naval Academy graduate and President Jimmy Carter.
Great man. Ineffective president. Just not effective. I don't know that anyone in that position. Ford acted as a good buffer from the turmoil of the Nixon administration, but the country wanted very different leadership, very different leadership. And so this humble man from Plains, Georgia, appealed to a certain percentage of the voters. He didn't win by that much. He was way out of his depth. He was way out of his depth. He was a nuclear trained naval officer. Nuclear trained naval officers, I've said to people in moments of kidding, not actually hoping it, but like I said, I could rule the world if I had 100 nukes working for me. I wouldn't want one of them to be in charge. Not one of them. They are amazing people. Their capacity is amazing. I just don't think he was the right guy to be in charge.
How about George H.W. Bush?
The most qualified man to serve in that office since probably George Washington. The One of the best men of character and judgment to ever have that office. I think he is appropriately gaining in approval of historians as time goes on, and I think history will be very good to him and should be.
About retiring senator from Kentucky, Mitch McConnell.
My God, I love Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell has, in my view, made one giant mistake, and that was not pursuing impeachment again against then President Trump, thinking that the criminal justice system would take care of him after he got out of office. That was a terrible miscalculation, a terrible miscalculation. That said, there has not been a Republican legislator in my lifetime who I thought has been more effective in office than Mitch McConnell. He's grounded, he's practical, and at the end of the day, what motivates him are where is the majority? Where can I get the votes for this? He's not tilting at windmills. He's all about trying to get a governing majority of votes in the Senate. So yeah. And the other thing is, I'm going to come back to this. He's an institutionalist. The Senate is an important body, and the rules that it has made for itself, but the constitutionally directed rules and those that have changed through amendments to the Constitution and the rules of the Senate have created a body that is different than the House. It's different on purpose, and it does good things for this republic. And I don't know anyone who is more interested in retaining those prerogatives for the Senate than Mitch McConnell.
Last one here. Senator and one-time presidential candidate John McCain.
I remember back in the old days when I've always been a conservative. I still am a conservative. I used to be a conservative Republican. Now I'm just a conservative. I used to be really down on John McCain when I believed he was insufficiently conservative as a Republican. As time has passed and the Republican Party became less and less conservative and more populist, John McCain's standing as a politician and a man of principle rose in my estimation to the point today where he's a genuine American hero. He's a hero of mine for what he did in the Navy and what he in his time as a prisoner of war and his refusal when the chips were down, getting his shoulders broken by the North Vietnamese prison camps. And all he has to do is go on TV and say what they want him to say, and they'll send him home because he's Admiral McCain's son. He doesn't do it. He won't do it. That's a hero. That's a hero in my book. As the Republican Party has come unmoored from its conservative principles, I find myself more and more drawn to his principled approach to politics. And I will never forget the video of him when he was running against Obama and he was at a town meeting and a woman stood up and just really questioned Barack Obama's patriotism and all sorts of things. And he just shut her down very kindly, very gently, but he just shut her down. I will never forget that.
Yeah. Bryan, you've written extensively and for years about your views of Trump, about MAGA, their impact on America. And you've hinted at this. The short version is you're not a fan.
No.
But I'm wondering what, if anything, going on in the country today does give you hope?
The Supreme Court would be one. I just got finished a little vacation. I was out on a boat with some friends, and They are very decidedly left of center, and I am not. And to hear them talk about this, the Supreme Court, it was instructional because we just see the world so very differently. But the tariff decision came down while we were at anchor, and we all talked about it quite a bit. I just love I love the Supreme Court. I read the entire decision front to back, concurrences, dissent, majority opinion, concurrences, dissents, read them all, because I love reading the logic of some of the smartest people there are. I don't agree at all with Justice Alito, Justice Thomas, and Justice Kavanaugh's reason in their decisions. But my God, their understanding of history, their language, their logic. When you make a mistake in logic on the step from A to B, which I believe they're doing, everything from B to Z is gone. But their
Yep.
logic from B to Z was pretty darn good. It's just the A to B part that bothers me is wait a second, you can't just give the president free and unhindered reign to do foreign policy. That's not what the system created. It's a shared responsibility. Like most responsibilities, it's shared. But so I think the Supreme Court gives me great sense of positive motion. I think technology. I think a lot of the things we see in the technological world. I think Silicon Valley gets a little high on its own supply, but there's nothing like it in the world, and it's ours. It's ours. It's created by a free enterprise system underpinned by the world's best higher education system, and it is nourished by talent from all over the world. That little chunk of America is fighting way above its weight. It's doing all kinds of wonderful things. It's doing some scary things, and I think there are people smarter than me that have to deal with that. But by and large, what I see coming out of Silicon Valley is advancing civilization. Yeah, I think those are two good things that are giving me some hope.
Nice. Nice. I want to transition and ask you a few questions about this next stage of life.
Yeah.
You've been in the Navy, you've been a naval strategist, a naval consultant, now you're retired. First, I want to ask, and I'm just curious, you and I were introduced by
Bill
a
Carrier.
mutual friend. Yeah, Bill Carrier,
Yeah.
mutual friend I worked with, and then you worked with him. Uh, and he purposefully linked us up because he knew we were both writers. So why do you write? And what do you get out of that nothing else in life gives you?
I wish I were self-confident enough to say I write for myself, but I don't. If I wrote for myself, I'd write a diary. I like writing for other people. I like when other people like what I write. I like when they don't like it and they engage me in reasonable debate. I like that less than when they say you're great and everything's wonderful and I wish I could write like you. That's all great. I love to hear those things. I'm a very weak man when it comes to the acceptance of that kind of validation. But I can't say I do it for myself. I do it, a part of it is for me, but I like the validation.
Nice.
I wish it were otherwise, but it's not.
It's okay. That's the answer. That's great. That's
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. And I do. I wish I were a better man. I'm not. I'm not a better man. I'm this guy. I'm this guy. And this guy likes to read when people say that was pretty good.
Yeah. I remember my old political philosophy professor, Father Shaw, Jesuit, one-eyed, and he would talk with us about what does he would phrase it as the active man do in retirement. And he gave the examples. George Washington returned to Mount Vernon after the presidency. Robert E. Lee, after the Confederacy lost the Civil War, what does Robert E. Lee do? But he goes to head a small college in Lexington, Virginia. And the same political philosophy professor had us read Cicero, who said he was never busier than when he had nothing to do. Talk with us about your views and vision of retirement. What are these years going to look like? And what does living a good life in retirement mean?
Boy, it's such a great question. It's things I've been thinking about for a long time. I retired at age 60 in November. It wasn't just stopping working. It involved something much bigger. It is a philosophical shift. Since the time I was 22 years old or 21 years old, and I started earning a paycheck in the Navy, until that moment, until November 30th of this year, of 2025, I'm sorry, my scan was over the horizon. It was strategic. It was the world and America's place in the world. I cared deeply about the politics of national defense, the politics of foreign policy, the politics of a strong America and domestic policy to create a strong America so that it could be strong overseas, so that we could lead the world. All of those things were bound up in my naval service in some way. All of those things were bound up in my consulting. I was shamelessly shilling a more powerful Navy so that this country could be more influential around the world, because when we're more influential, it works to the advantage of American citizens. We are richer, we are freer, we are better when America is out in the world running the show. That's where I come from. My retirement includes a philosophical shift, and that is I am not interested in influencing above the horizon anymore. My radar scan has rolled in to the horizon. I want to concentrate on my love for Karen and the girls, something that necessarily suffered while I was worrying about fleets and continents. I want to worry about my physical body and taking care of myself. As I watched my two parents die in the last 2 years, lived good long lives, but really diminished physically in ways that I think I want to try and take a lesson from that. So I'm rolling my scan in. I'm more worried about my church. I'm more worried about my town. I'm more worried about my family, my farm, my brothers and sister. Everything has rolled in. I can't tell you, it was wonderful. Back before Christmas, the president made lots of announcements about Navy force structure. And I got requests for comment from all the major news organizations. And I can't tell you how wonderful it was to say, I'm retired, I'm not current, I'm not credible. Thank you very much for asking. And that was all based on this intentional rolling in of what I care about now.
Hmm.
And I'm really trying to be a better friend, a better partner, a better parent, a better brother, and not give a crap about being a strategist or an advocate or anything else I've done. That's how I'm pursuing my retirement. I am the space created from lack of paid work is being filled by trying to pay attention to those other parts of my life.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Mm. Tell us about your coming time in Crete. what you're calling your version of Walden.
Yeah.
Why are you doing it? What are you going to do? Why Crete? All those things.
All right. Catherine and I, for a long time, have been talking about what I call burrowing in, which is going somewhere for an extended period of time. And it was always a month that we talked about, and going native, like getting up every day and walking to get a baguette and a cup of coffee or whatever it is. And we talked about this over the course of a few years, and it was clear that there was always just a little bit of a difference of what that meant. and but that's life, right? You don't always agree with your partner, and we would. And finally, one day we were talking. It was last year, and I was talking about a part of France that I was interested in, potentially doing this burrowing in, this immersion thing, shortly after I retire, because this is going to be part of the new life. And I mentioned the town, and she goes, "Was there a train station there?" And I looked at her and I go, "Why does that matter?" And she said, so we can make day trips." And I said, and I was like, "What part of burrowing in don't you get? Day trips are not burrowing in. I'm talking about total immersion in a little town or a little." And to her credit, because she is far better human being than I am, she said, "Is there a chance you might enjoy this trip more going by yourself?" And I looked
I
at
love
her
it.
and
I love
I looked at her and I said, "Is that an option?" And she said, "Yeah, of course it is." And I was like, "Yes, 30 days by myself, getting coffee every morning from the same guy, going to dinner 5 nights a week in the same restaurant, going for one run and one walk a day in a little place that's just mine." So that's how the concept came. So that's my Walden, right? That's my Walden. I'm going to Crete to see what the world is like by myself like that. I'm going to Hanya on the island of Crete because 35 years ago when I was in the Navy, I had to leave my strike group in the Red Sea. There were 3 carrier strike groups in the Red Sea getting ready to fight the first Gulf War. And the naval bureaucrats in Norfolk said, "Oh, by the way, a bunch of ships in the Red Sea haven't fired their missile systems in the required periodicity. So you got to go back up into the Mediterranean and do a missile exercise." And Sixth Fleet, who's in Italy, said, "Okay, we'll take care of this. We'll put these guys through a missile exercise." And they sent down to our strike group, "Hey, we need a guy from your strike group to come to Crete because there's a NATO missile firing installation, NAMFI, and work on the plans for this." And I guess I was spare baggage or whatever on my ship, and the captain said, "McGrath, pack your bags, you're going to Crete." And I flew from a helicopter up to Egypt, and then from Egypt I took a C-130 to Crete. And I was there for 10 days while my buddies were down in the Red Sea humping it, getting ready to fight a war. I'm in Crete drinking beer. I had a driver. I had a great little hotel down in the city. The driver would take me up to the base each day and take me home each day. It was just great. And I really loved it was a town, probably about 25 or 30,000 people. So it was a proper town. I think it's 50,000 now. And so when I when Catherine said, "Why don't you go by yourself?" I was like, "I had a good time there. I'm going to go back there." So that's why I'm going to Anya and Crete.
Oh, it's so good. That's so good,
Yeah,
man.
yeah.
Let me ask. Go ahead. Go ahead.
We just got back from a trip to the Bahamas. We went to Antigua. We're going somewhere in the fall. We travel together. Don't get me
Yeah.
wrong, but this
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
just a great. It was such an unselfish thing on her part to give me something selfish, and this is incredibly selfish.
But good for you.
Yeah,
I think that's amazing. I think it's wonderful. I think it's great.
yeah, yeah. I like being by myself. I do. I one of the things that Catherine was talking to me originally about retiring early. She said something about, she was like, "Don't you think you'll get bored?" And I said to her, "Catherine, we've been together at this time maybe 15 or 16 years. Have you ever seen me bored?" And she said, "No." I said, "'Cause I
Yeah,
don't get bored. I don't get bored."
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
totally. I, I want to ask just one question about this. You kind of waved at it in an answer a few minutes ago. You've written a little bit about it, not a ton, but a little bit. And I'm just curious, what's the pull or the call of religion, specifically Christianity, for you? Do you have people or ideas or institutions influencing or inspiring your life in that direction? And I realize this is a super personal question. Answer however much or however little you want to answer. You've kind of waved at this a little bit in your writings. You waved a little bit in your answer a minute ago. I want to dig a little bit more into that.
I'm happy to talk about this, Russell. I am metaphysically certain that God exists. I'm metaphysically certain that God has acted positively in my life. I believe that Christianity writ large has been the most beneficial force, the advancement of humanity that has ever existed, with capitalism coming just behind it. And I am nearly as committed a capitalist as I am a Christian. Religion is very important to me. I once had a conversation with a friend where I talked about my how I view faith. There is an unbridgeable gap between what we can understand and what God knows, right? That's the faith leap, right? My my goal was to make that faith leap as small as possible by trying to think and reason and read and understand and talk with other people about faith in their lives, so that I always recognized that I could never get there, but I always wanted to make that jump as small as I could.
Hmm.
And I continue to do that. Christianity has been important to me. It's been important to me because it provides me with that certainty that I'm not alone.
Hmm.
Because I think that sense of being alone is the source of so much of the despair in our world. I am not alone.
Hmm. Hmm. I appreciate that. I appreciate you diving into that. I I want to end on just a few last questions, Bryan.
Sure.
What is one practice or tip or maxim that you believe led you to be successful in your career or life, and that I likely haven't heard from others?
Oh, yeah, I have never had an original thought. I think I have synthesized the genius of others.
Then maybe I have heard it from others.
I do what's right even when no one's looking. Tell the truth even when it hurts. Over and over again until it's perfect, and then perfectly over and over again.
I love what you said earlier, relentless excellence. I mean, what
Relentless
a great,
excellence. Relentless excellence. Yeah. There was a car that used to have a motto. It said the relentless pursuit of excellence.
yeah,
I just took pursuit of out of it. Relentless excellence. And it
yeah,
was
yeah.
it never accepts mediocrity and it never stops.
What is a book that I likely haven't heard of, haven't read, that I should read, and you think I'd love?
It's a book called Unconventional Success: A Fundamental Approach to Personal Investment by a guy named David F. Swenson. I think Swenson might have died relatively recently. I I was 40 years old. I didn't have a penny. I just, if I had money in my checking account, I was solvent. That's all that mattered. And I read this book, and David Swenson is an institutional investor. His playing field was Yale University and I think Stanford University. I think he ran their endowments. And he took what he knew about institutional investment and applied it to Russell Smith and Bryan McGrath. And it is the most common sense and most effective method of passing along important knowledge about how to invest and how to thrive. And so I retired at 60 in no small measure because I did what this book said.
Mm.
I did what this book said. I stopped paying other people to manage my money. I put my money into passive investment. It's standard stuff, but it's very well packaged in this book. And yeah, I think this is the one.
All right. I love it. I love it. All right. Last couple questions. I write I hate the term blog, but a blog about a lot of things, but a lot of it's about walking. What role does walking play in your life?
It's a great question. We have a farm here. We have a 50-acre farm. And Catherine's brother has gone out with like a bush hog and he's cleared through the woods. And we have, we have trails near us that Catherine and I will go walking. And some of my best moments of clarity have come on these walks with Catherine around our farm and at Pickering Creek Audubon Park. It's what it's called out here. And what kills me is I'm so aware of how beneficial these are and how much, and I don't do it enough. I exercise, I run on my treadmill right behind me here. I run on the treadmill. I go dance. I go to the Y 3 times a week with the 70-year-old ladies and do low impact aerobics. I don't walk. I don't walk for exercise.
Mm.
And I think this is one of the things my parents didn't do as they began to age. So I'm 60 years old. I still run. That's what I do as I run on the treadmill. Someday I won't be able to do that. I already have 2 fake hips. I'm not supposed to be running as it is, but I figured I got them young enough that I just have to replace them again someday. And maybe then but I need to walk more because I am
Mm.
well aware of the clarity I get from it, number one. And number two, Catherine loves to do it. And in this time of rolling my scan in and finding things to do with Catherine, doing more things with Catherine, as I say, as I'm running off to Greece for a month, but doing more things with Catherine. This is one that we both love, and that was something we have to do more of.
No, that's awesome. All right, let me ask you this last question. Where do you find beauty in the world?
This is a great matter of contention between Catherine and me. Catherine finds beauty in nature. I find beauty in nature too, but I am overwhelmed with a sense of beauty and a sense of God whenever I am in a church or a chapel or mostly large churches, but a majestic church where where I feel the presence of God and I feel how tiny I am.
Mm.
There's a cathedral in Malta. I think it's called the Co-Cathedral because it acts as a cathedral for both the Anglican Church and the Catholic Church. St. Peter's in Rome, St. Patrick's in New York City. I find myself when I am in mostly old, beautiful churches and cathedrals. Sometimes they're tiny little churches and cathedrals,
Hmm.
but I find beauty where I find myself thinking, God is here. God is everywhere, but when I am in those places, I find beauty because God is there.
What a great place to end, Bryan. This has been an awesome conversation. I've loved every minute. I could talk to you all day. I could just hear you
Thank you,
answer all
Russell.
my questions. All day it's been wonderful to have you. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Russell. Means a lot. You're a good friend. Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much, Bryan.